And we are live here in the Storycraft Cafe. I am your host, Hank Garner, and today I am super excited to have Peggy Townsend on the show with me. She has a phenomenal new book. It is called The Beautiful and the Wild, and you see it sitting on my shelf there behind me, and you've got the brand new hardcover edition right there as well. It released yesterday. If you're listening to this live as we're doing this on Wednesday, or if you're listening to it later on our podcast channel, it's out, available everywhere now, and you can go grab it at your local favorite bookstore. Peggy, I love this book so much, and I'm really excited to talk about it. Welcome to the show today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate what you're doing and the support you give to authors and for highlighting my book. This is really exciting for me. And so, yeah, thank you very much for this.
Well, thank you. Peggy, I love to start the conversation with a fun question just to kind of get the ball rolling. And one question that I love to ask people is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Wow, that started really young. I was probably in fourth grade, and I started reading Nancy Drew books, and she was so strong and so powerful. And I just loved how I think I was a little curious kid, so I loved how she would stick her nose into other people's business. And so she just caught my attention, and I was a reader anyway. And I wanted to be like her, and I wanted to write books like that. So yeah, that's when the urge started. Yeah, that's a good question.
I love it. I had an older sister. She's a year and a half older than me. And invariably, people would give her Nancy Drew books and they would get handed down to me. So I was a Nancy Drew diehard. But I never actually got them. I got them handed down. I would get Hardy Boys books, which I loved, but Nancy was just she was a different creature altogether, and I love those books. And they definitely, I feel like, kind of hatched a love of mystery, and uh, probably why I love thrillers to this day is probably because of those books.
Yeah, yeah, and that sports car she drove, it was
Oh yeah.
she was badass before they called people women badass, you know?
Right, right. That's
So
so
yeah,
funny.
yeah.
Um, you is this your third novel? Do I have that right?
It is. It's my first with Berkeley
Okay.
Publishing. So yeah, but I've had two other novels. They were more mystery, they more traditional mystery with the newspaper reporter as the protagonist. This is more domestic suspense.
Gotcha. Um, I happened to open Instagram on my phone yesterday afternoon, and Hank Philippi Ryan, a great friend of mine that she's been on the show a number of times, I saw her going live with you, and I opened it up on my computer and I watched a few minutes of it, and I was and I noticed that she was asking you some things that I wanted to talk to you about. So I closed it down real quick because I didn't want your conversation with that Hank to influence your conversation with this Hank. We have a great time. We call it the Hank and Hank show when we record, but
Oh, how fun.
it's
Well, I have another Hank in my life. My dad was named Hank.
and I bet he was a phenomenal guy.
He was. He was. He was pretty amazing. He was a maverick, I guess I would call him. So
Love it. You don't meet an awful lot of Hanks in the world, so when you find one, you need to latch onto him. I think.
right. And I love Hank Felipe Ryan. She's amazing.
She is amazing. But you, with this being your third novel that you published, you had been working as a writer for a good while before writing fiction. What was your day job for years?
Well, for years I was a newspaper journalist, and so I covered everything from murder trials to county fairs to doing investigative work about healthcare disparities, about kids that lived on the street and had no support from many agencies. And feature stories. So yeah, I was a daily journalist. So from that, I really learned how to discipline myself to sit down and write, because as a journalist, you don't have time for the muse. The clock's ticking, the presses are waiting, and so
Right.
um,
One
that's
thing I've
certainly
always
as far
no, I'm
as like
sorry.
practice for writing.
Right. One thing that I've always been curious about is in when you're a daily journalist, how do you know if a story is going to be worth pursuing? Because some of these stories are very in depth, and you can spend, days, weeks, months chasing down a lead, and what if it just doesn't go anywhere? Like, do you develop a skill kind of early on to kind of smell whether a story is worth pursuing or not?
I'd like to say you do, but every once in a while I would chase a story and think, this is great, this is great. And then something would happen and it just would fall apart and it didn't hold water. But generally, if a story either touched my heart or I just felt like there was this innate sense that there was a grain of something there that needed to be looked at. That's when I would go after that. And most of the time it worked out. There were very few times when I had to abandon a project, but I remember doing one project and I swear I was working on it for 3 months and I had to kill it. So, which was very sad.
It's got to be
But
frustrating and sad and all the emotions.
yeah, yeah, exactly. But glad because I didn't want to print something that was not true.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
I'm glad I found out before it ran. So
Right.
there's that kind of relief.
True. True. Um, well, I've gotten to know quite a number of journalists through the years that have gone on to write fiction. And on the surface, it would seem like a fiction writer and a journalist would be at odds with each other. Maybe not at odds, but on different ends of the spectrum. But um, from my outsider view, it would seem to me that journalism will add certain tools to your writer's toolkit. For instance, the way I see it from my vantage point, especially if you live in a big city where maybe a happening goes on and you've got a number of news outlets and they all send a reporter or a journalist to go cover it, and each one of them will tell the same story either in their newspaper or on the evening news or whatever it is. It'll be the same set of facts, but it will be filtered through the eyes of the journalist who's reporting on it and who witnessed the events or who talked to whichever handful of witnesses. It's always a little different depending on this person's vision of what's happening. Do I have that right? Do things like that happen where different people will report differently on a story just because they see it differently? And what do you feel like your years in journalism have added to your fiction writing toolkit?
Okay, those are
And I know
that's
that's like
very good.
eight questions all rolled in one. I'm sorry.
You have to remind me partway through part of the question, but let's talk about the writer toolbox.
Yeah.
I think as a journalist, it's really hard to go from journalism to fiction writing. I thought, oh, how hard can that be? I write every day, but it was way harder than I thought. I really had to switch my mindset to one of creating instead of reporting.
Mhm.
And so, when I wrote a newspaper story, I had the facts, I knew where it was going, I just followed the trail. When you're doing it yourself, you have to make stuff up and you have to follow a trail that's logical, but you also want it to be different. So there's that moment where you're like, okay, where am I going to go? Where is this character going to take me? But as far as the tools in my toolbox, I think what journalism did was allowed me to do research, pretty well. Like I love research. I also learned to see detail. In journalism, a lot of the times the story's in the detail, right?
Right.
And so, um, as I'm writing fiction, I remember that, and my characters have small details that I think tell who they are more than me saying, "Oh, this person's curious," So I use that in my fiction writing to tell the story, to expand the characters. Um, as far as journalism reporting different things from different viewpoints, I guess, in one event. That, that does happen. I see that nowadays a lot. I think what that might be more a product of, well, let me just, instead, I'm going to say what I believe is that when I report something, when I'd go to an event and there'd be a lot of reporters there, I'd really try to see what the story is. I'd really try to look for the details. And you can't be objective because you're reporting. It's going through your brain, your
Right.
eyes. But I really wanted to be fair. So I would try to, when I would see something, I would try to look at it from different angles. Like I would look at it straightforward, but I also, well, what's behind this? What is this person really saying? Who else is there? Why is this happening? So my story might be a little different from someone else because I have this other angle that I'm also looking at. That doesn't mean one person is wrong or making stuff up. But I think as long as you're fair and work to be fair, I think that's the best you can do.
Gotcha. Your first novel that you published, See Her Run, the Aloha Snow series, book one. How did this book come out? So you're working as a journalist. What was it that made you itch to write fiction?
I think I just wanted to try something new. I have to tell you this quick little story. I don't know if you know what the Poynter Institute is, but it's a journalism center in Florida. And I went there for a week for a narrative nonfiction writing program. And James McBride was there, The Color of Water, Heaven and Earth Grocery Store. And he changed the way I write. He just totally upended my idea of how to write story, how to create character. And so as I'm writing my nonfiction, I started to think, well, what if I could make that? What if I tried my hand at fiction? What if I see how far my imagination could go? But I really had to work my creativity muscles, right? I had to learn, I had to study, I had to read other people's books and try to figure out how they did things, and so, yeah, it was a real learning process for me.
In the writer community, we love to stick people in primarily one of two camps. They're either pantsers, they write by the seat of their pants, or they're planners or plotters, people that meticulously sort out the story ahead of time before they start drafting and have a roadmap, if you will, to go by. When since you were switching gears, going to a completely new format, to write in, how did you approach it? Since you're 3 books in now into your publishing career, has your process changed of your pre-writing?
Yeah, that's another good question. I'm afraid like I'm an obsessive plotter. So my outline is many, many pages, right?
Yeah.
Because I hate the novels where at the end there's like, ta-da, and you're like, how did that happen? There was nothing in there to say this is where that book was going, right?
Yeah.
So that's maybe part of the reporting is I want to lay a foundation for the ending. So I have an idea for the beginning and I have an idea for the ending. But that said, as you write, the characters, and you probably know this, the characters, they oddly start to take over and they become almost real. And they're almost like your friends, like you see them every day when you sit down to write. So as you're writing and getting to know them and developing them, sometimes they change the story. Sometimes they do things because, you'd plotted that they were going to do this, but you realize that person would never do that. They would do this thing. So in that sense, I'm a pantser at that point. I kind of follow the character, but I make sure that all the points that lead up to the ending that were in my outline are still there. So, yeah.
I joke a lot that that writing is one of the only things that you can do where you can say that the characters that you made up decided to do something completely different or said something and no one looks at you like you're silly. That's
right. Other writers understand that. My husband sometimes wonders, what are you talking about? This person, well, she wouldn't do that. And so, yeah,
Right.
well, thank you for understanding that.
Yeah. So what was the catalyst for that first book? The writer's workshop where you started thinking differently about character and kind of the structure of story. Did you just uh, was there an idea that had been kind of nagging at you that you thought, well, this is the time to pursue that, or kind of what was the genesis of that first book?
Well, I think the idea came to me, I think, that was about the time, and I'm trying to remember the exact person's name, but, there was journalists who had been caught making stuff up, right? And they were being just totally shunned and disgraced, and, I was thinking about that, a journalist has such high responsibility,
Hmm.
and why would someone just suddenly make this stuff up? What would drive them to make something up? And so I started thinking about the idea of a disgraced journalist trying to get back, which to her sense of doing just, finding justice and fighting for the little guy. And so the character just kind of came formed to me, and I wanted to explore that, which was you needed to explore it in a fiction way, right?
Right.
So that's how that book started. That's how I created the character.
That's an amazing premise. That's one of those ideas that, like, oh, that's so pregnant with all sorts of ideas. That's I love that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I thought how if something happened to my journalism job, how I would long to be back out there. When someone came and told you this horrible thing happened, to be able to make some sense of it, or maybe help right a wrong, or give a voice to somebody that didn't have a voice. And so yeah, I thought how that would nag at you, that because that's such a part of your being. So that's how my
Right.
character came about. That question formed the whole novel.
I love it. How long did it take you to make it through that first novel? That being your first stab at fiction. Did was it a daunting process, or did it just start flowing when you got started?
Um, it started flowing, but as you know, first drafts are often really horrible. So I would say it took a year in total, but one of the things that I did, and I can recommend this to someone that's serious about writing fiction, is I found a woman who is a development editor, and her job was to go through the book and tell me what needed to be fixed, what was wrong. And so, I think writing novels and writing fiction is not only an art, but it's a business as well, right?
Sure.
And so I thought I need to invest in my business by hiring an expert to help me because I don't know this field super well. And she was amazing. So she really helped shape the book. And then from her, I was able to find an agent who also helped shape the book. So it was the actual first writing came pretty quickly, but it really took a year to refine it. And like I said, I can recommend hiring a good development editor if
Sure.
you if it's your first novel that you want to get out there.
And novel writing is so strange because you spend the better part of a year a lot of times working on this book alone. It's just you and these characters that come alive and live in your head, and you get so close to the story because these people are alive to you, and you're having a dialogue with these people that don't exist, and you're shaping their lives and they're in turn shaping yours, and it can become a little overwhelming at times, and having a person step in that has no ties to the project whatsoever and can take a critical eye and really shine some light in areas that you just can't see anymore because you're just too close to it. That is worth more than you can describe. Just having another person that you can trust to take a look at your story is amazing.
It's true, yeah. You can't give it to your mom to read and
Right.
expect to get good feedback that will make an editor want to buy your book. So,
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, having that clear, wise eye is really wonderful.
Yeah, yeah. Well, after that book, you published The Thin Edge, the book two in that series, and now your third book, The Beautiful and the Wild, just came out yesterday. This is a new set of characters, new publisher. Um, Tell me about the genesis of this story. Where did it come from, and how did you get where you are now?
Well, the genesis for this book came. So I live in a little cabin up in the mountains part time, and you have to heat it with firewood. And so I don't know if you know how big a cord of wood is, but a cord of
Oh
wood
yeah.
is very big. So I was hauling wood from down where it was dumped up to the deck to stack the wood and listening to podcasts. And I heard on the radio came the story of Billy Sipple, who was an ex-Marine who thwarted the attempted assassination of Gerald Ford in San Francisco.
Wow.
And he was lauded as a hero, but he was a closeted gay man, and he was outed by the media at some point.
Oh no.
And his family knew nothing about his life in San Francisco, and he was shunned by them. And according to this podcast, he became very bitter and died a very lonely death in San Francisco afterwards. That it had just ruined his life. And so I had this idea, because I'm a reporter and I've dealt with secrets. This idea, like, what if you did something wonderful and good, and it exposed your deepest secret? And so I started to think about that. That was the genesis for the book.
Wow.
And
Tell, no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
oh, I'm just saying, I was also fascinated by the idea of memory. And so if you read the book, the main character has a memory that may or may not be true. So I'll just say that. I don't want to ruin the twist, but yeah.
Yeah, and that is I was really intrigued by that because as I was a teenager in the 80s, and I remember um what did they call it, the satanic panic, where all over the news there were these you know supposed, I don't, who knows if they're real or not, the groups of devil worshippers all over the place that were stealing kids and abusing them, or murdering them, whatever the story was. And then the idea of implanted memories comes out, and well, was this true, and was it not? And it really, if you really start digging into it, it really makes you wonder, not only how I can trust other people, but how can I trust even myself when we start really, when enough stuff gets poured in there, what. So that was a really intriguing, it was really interesting to see how you dealt with that in the book. I'm trying to step around it and not give away too much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that very much. Yeah, I mean, that was the headline stuff, but when you dig deeper into the memory research, it is, like you said, it's super fascinating.
Yeah, it is. It is. Tell me about the character of Liv. Where did she come from?
Well, I wanted to write about a woman that was wounded in lots of ways, but had this inner strength that she didn't know that she had. And I'm kind of a firm believer. I just read this book called The Comfort Crisis, and it talks about how we get too comfortable in our lives, and that discomfort is actually a gift sometimes, because it can tell us what our strengths are. So I wanted a woman who would go through a test of fire and find her strength along the way. And so that was kind of the genesis for her.
Gotcha. When you open the book, you drop us right in, and it's almost disorienting there for a second, and as you kind of pick up at what's happening in the world, therefore what's happening in the story, and was what was your intent where when you first started kind of shaping this narrative? Did you, obviously you meant to, but what were you thinking about kind of the way that you kind of inject us directly into the story?
Yeah, that's another good question. I love books that do that. I like, maybe I'm impatient, but I like the ones that drop you right into the action.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to do that. That's a little bit of journalism too, that, where you have to grab somebody and make them want to read, because there's so many reasons for us not to sit down and read anymore.
Yeah.
But also, I have two wonderful editors at Berkeley, and their idea was, I had done more of a chronological beginning, and their idea was to do then and now chapters, which I loved, because there's almost two stories going on. There's the
Yeah.
now story and there's the then story. So yeah, so that's how that came about. I really liked it when they suggested that. I was like, oh, this is perfect. It puts you in the action immediately, and it gives you two stories to follow.
And as a reader, one of my favorite things is when you have a then and now, threads like that, wondering where they're going to converge, and trying to think ahead, and well, I wonder how this is, going to intersect, and that's always fun. That's an added little element for readers as well.
Yeah, I love those then and now stories, or dual timeline.
Yeah,
I think
right.
those are great. They're great because they're taking you along on two different paths, and
Yeah.
so yeah.
There's a huge twist that we alluded to in the book, and there's some other twisty elements to the book. When you're planning the book, when you're laying out your roadmap ahead of time, do you start thinking about those twists? And do you, is there a formula about, well, this twist needs to be 38%, into the book, or, you know, formula is probably not the right word, but are there certain places where the pace dictates that a certain upheaval needs to happen?
Yeah, no, I think you're right there. I think, as I was plotting it out, I thought it was getting a little slow, and I thought, I need a twist here. I need something to change, to flip the action on its head. And so I tried to pace them through. I didn't want them to be all log jammed up against each other. So I tried to pace them through, whether it was 38% or what. I bet there is a formula for that, but I don't have it. I love twists. I wanted to put, life is a plot twist, right?
Right.
So yeah.
One giant plot twist for sure. Well, the book is available everywhere now. It came out yesterday in hardcover, Kindle edition, and audiobook. I have the audiobook in my queue, but I haven't started listening to it yet since it just dropped yesterday. Have you listened to any of the audio yet, Peggy?
I did. And Carissa
Yeah.
Backer is the reader. She is so amazing that actually I kind of got lost in her voice, and I was thinking, wow, this is a great book. I realized that I wrote it, but she just
That's
gave
the
such
best.
life to it. And
Yeah.
just exactly how I heard it in my head as I was writing, she captured it. So the audiobook is amazing. So yeah, I
That's
can highly
such a great
recommend that
feeling.
too.
Yeah, and I love to read a book and then experience it again in audio, because it is a different experience, and the narrator brings a lot of times an inflection, a tone that maybe you didn't get the first time, and it can be like a total other experience. The Beautiful and the Wild, available everywhere now. Go visit your local bookstore, pick it up. We'll also put links in the show notes where you can grab it from Amazon or Audible if you don't have a great local bookstore near you. Peggy, if people are just discovering you and want to dig into all the great stuff that you're up to, is there a place online that's kind of a central place for them to kind of catch up on all the things that you're up to?
I would say probably Instagram is the best place to go. I have a website, but it's kind of, I don't go there that much to update it. So yeah, so just follow me on Instagram, Peggy Townsend Writer, and that's where I post most of the stuff that I'm doing and things that are happening. So thank you for asking that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll put a link to that in the show notes as well, so people can just click over and follow you. The Beautiful and the Wild, go grab your copy today. Peggy, it's been so much fun chatting. Thank you for taking time to come on the show.
Oh, thanks, Hank. I really appreciate it. And you're on my list of favorite Hanks.